Welcome to this podcast is making me thirsty, the number one destination for Seinfeld fans. This episode 139. Today's guest is a two-time Emmy Award nominee and an American Cinema Editors Award winner. He has worked on the production crew as a director and an editor for over 50 TV series, including Grace Under Fire, NewsRadio, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Mom, and of course, he was the editor for 2 seasons on Seinfeld. Please welcome Skip Collector. Skip, thanks for joining.
My pleasure. Glad to be on the show.
Skip, we've spoken to cinematographers, writers, hairdressers, costume designers from Seinfeld, but never an editor. So this is a real treat. So take us back, 1996, I believe, you got the job on Seinfeld, season 8. Tell us a little bit about how that role came about. I know you had a great resume. Obviously, Grace Under Fire in 95, 96, and then came Seinfeld. How'd the role come about?
It was late. It was after the July 4th weekend. And, normally you're tied up by June sometime. And I was probably about 3 weeks away from going to table with the next season of Grace, and was working for a buddy of mine, just doing some interstitial stuff, and got a call from my ex-wife who said, there's a Tim Kaiser on the phone from Seinfeld. I think you want to return this one. And I was like, okay. And to be honest, my first reaction was Janet was out of town and wasn't going to come back for a couple weeks, and that they just were looking for somebody to fill in. I honestly had no idea they were calling me for the show. I knew that I was a good editor. I just didn't have that. I didn't know that many people have that big of a resume. But it turns out that Mark Greenberg had worked with me on a pilot and remembered the work I did. And I worked with Andy Ackerman as well. So the next thing you know, I'm talking to Tim and we're talking about the season. And quite honestly, I had an out-of-body experience where I couldn't believe I was having this phone call. I mean, this biggest television show ever. And they're calling me. And so we start negotiating, and it's on a Monday, I think, right after 4th of July weekend. And, we get to some terms pretty quickly. And Tim goes, well, listen, Jerry's schedule isn't really good tomorrow, and it's not really good Wednesday. Can you come down today?
Wow.
And I said, well, let me call the man I'm working for and see if he can let me go, and I'll get right back to you. So I call the guy I'm working with and I say, hey, Evan, I got to jump, man. I got to go meet Jerry Seinfeld. And he's like, oh, yeah, sure. What's really happening? And I go, no, man, they're calling me for the show. Well, he said, immediately get out, go do your thing. So I drive home because at the time I'd torn my Achilles tendon playing tennis. I've got a cast on my left foot. So I tell Tim, I'm like, I'm only going to be wearing shorts and, flip-flops. And he goes, it's cool. Just come on in here. So I'm wearing a t-shirt. I decided to go home, put on a polo shirt. My ex is going, what's going on? I said, I've got to go down there. And she's like, wow. So, I was living in Hermosa Beach at the time, which is literally like a quarter of a mile from where I am now, and had probably, 45 minutes to an hour drive to get there. So, of course, in my head, I'm just, what's my favorite episode and and that and so on and so forth. So it's at CBS Radford that I'm real familiar with. Did a lot of shows there. I know right where the building is. And because I kind of met a couple of the writers working on other shows, pilots and things. And at that time when I was doing Grace, I'd have a break. I'd walk around, smoke a cigar, and Max and Tom would be outside sometimes with Peter. Melman, and they'd be smoking on porch, writing stuff down, and I just hang out with them. And so it was kind of nice to just meet those guys. So I go upstairs, it's empty, and I'm just kind of this one person sitting in this big bullpen area. And next thing I know, here's Jerry walking down the hall, and he looks at my cast. He goes, "What happened?" I go, "Tennis." He goes, "Oh man. All right, well, come on." And so luckily, when I got to the meeting, it was Tim, it was Max and Dave, and it was Peter. So I have kind of a room of friendlies, people that I've worked with who know me. And I think the interview took about 10 or 15 minutes. I mean, it felt longer, of course. Of course, he did ask me what my favorite episode was. I said the Cadillac. His was the Rye. But the Cadillac ties into the Rye. So anyway, it was a really good meeting. And one other thing I'll actually double back to tell you is, right before I came in to meet with Jerry, I asked Tim, I said, "Tim, look, I know I'm not your first call. So explain what's going on." And he goes, "Well, no, you're not the first call. But it appears that the people ahead of you, when they would meet Jerry, would fall into two categories. One, they'd either be so nervous that they couldn't talk, or two, they were so nervous they couldn't stop talking." I thought, well, that's good news for me to know. I'll try to make my answers kind of simple and just not get too starstruck. So after about 15 minutes, Jerry goes, "Okay, really nice meeting you. We'll talk." And Tim's walking me out and he's going, "I think that went really, really well." So I get back in the car and I'm driving home. And as is, part of my neurotic Jewish background, every 10 minutes I'm driving and my phone isn't ringing, I'm beating myself that I said the wrong thing. I didn't give this answer right. I didn't do that, and I'm just kicking myself. And then halfway home, the phone rings and it's Tim. And he says, "You're in." And I'm like, holy shit. He goes, "One thing though, you asked for X numbers of dollars. Is it okay if Jerry pays you $100 more a week?" And I'm like, normally they're trying to grind you down. They're never asking for more. And I go, "What's that about?" And he goes, "Well, Paul Reiser pays his editor the same money you're asking for, and Jerry wants to pay you $100 more just to fuck with Paul."
Wow. Great story.
That's great.
It was, again, I was out of body. I called my dad. I called my mom. My dad called me back the next day to say, "Really? You got that show?" I'm like, "Yes, Dad."
And Dad, yeah, in a 15-minute interview, like, so what does Jerry ask? Like, what's your philosophy? Like, what does an editing interview kind of go like?
It's really such a difficult question to answer because there's so much nuance. All I could say is that if I had to say that I had a style, which I don't, other than to try to be true to the story, timing clearly is, that's obvious, but I use reactions, I like to go to reactions to counterpoint, the line, the punchline. And I just also am very conscious of pacing. And I knew for their show, that was super key. And I, to be honest with you, I don't remember what other stuff I babbled about, but it was just like looking through all the dailies to try to find these couple little pieces of gold, because if that's where it is, you have to sit there and look through all that. And you might find a look, that you can use somewhere else, and suddenly you just made something funnier. And if I can ever make something funnier than the writer's right, then I'm really doing my job.
Yeah, and then I actually had a question. I actually wrote that almost literally verbatim. You just answered for me. That's great. But curious if you could, touch on that a little bit more for our audience. Kind of take us through, like, what a typical week was for you for editing, like what it involved from kind of start to finish. I mean, are you, when you're editing, is Jerry in the room with you, or is the writer of the episode without Larry there? Who's kind of steering that ship, or how much leeway are they giving you? Just typically speaking, on a normal week, like kind of walk our audience through like what that looks like from your perspective.
Well, I came on the last 2 seasons when Larry wasn't there, so I think Larry was very involved in the editing. The system grew as we went. I remember the very first time I had no one in the room, and I just would go in on Monday. They shot the show over 3 days. I'm sure that you guys probably already know this by now. Monday, Tuesday without an audience, where I'm in my edit room cutting those scenes, and then Wednesday with the audience, where when we're in a swing set or an outside set that the audience could never see, they'll do a live scene, then they'll play back a tape scene that I've cut, and then they'll play another live scene, and they make you 2 cut scenes that I did on swing sets or outside. And so when we shot on Wednesdays, I was there on the set because I would always have my script and take notes. Like if they were doing 4 takes and I had one that I just thought was just fantastic, I would just mark my script and bracket what I thought, from this take or that take. And that way, when I got to the edit room, I had some form of an idea. So if I could even mark 50 to 70% of the takes I thought might be better than others, or sometimes mark a really funny outtake or whatever, I would have that. So I would go into my room, Thursday. Jerry didn't like to edit on Thursday because he was really kind of tired from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday acting and writing.
Right.
So he just wanted to hang with the writers on Thursday. So I had Thursday, Friday by myself. I don't remember how many extra days they gave me, but I know that they were coming in on the very first show that I cut. And it might have been Monday, I don't know, or Tuesday. Anyway, all I know is I went in that weekend and just on my own time to just go over everything that much more. I didn't put in for it. That was my own time to just go in those days and just go through everything like with a fine-tooth comb. And I remember Jerry and Andy walking into my little office. I didn't have a very big office at all. There was just room for maybe a love seat in the back. And we sat down and they said, okay, play. I pushed the start button, and the show was that episode probably came in on the first cut assembly at 27 minutes. We had to get it down to about 23, 22 and a half. And just let it go. And I'm just like, I'm just damp under my arms. I'm just like, I don't know how this is going to go. And when it was all over, there was a lot of silence. Jerry looks over at Andy. He goes, well, we didn't see first cuts like that before. And I was like, I'm in.
Wow.
But,
and that's, Skip, that's the foundation, right? Episode of the first show.
I mean, you only get one time to make first impression. Right. So if I knocked it out of the park on that one, then they felt comfortable me understanding the show, understanding where the jokes were, finding the right performances, timing it, looking, just building, and just making the story as funny as I could, as they'd written it and produced it and shot it.
That's incredible. And you mentioned 27 minutes, and I probably to an editor to get it down to 22. It's even that's got to be a big challenge, right? I mean, that's a lot of meat, right? So
I think my challenge really was to take the 5-6 minutes out, try not to get caught. So what ended up
unnoticeable, right? You're going to almost make it like it's yeah.
My feeling is with editing, if you see it, it's bad.
So from that perspective, did you over those last 2 years ever get pushback from any of the actors? Like, hey, that bit I did was really funny, or any of that? I mean, or I can picture them coming up and kind of pleading, like, this scene was great. Did you get any of that?
Most of the 99% of the time, when the actors would see the playback, they'd be like, "Good job," or "Thank you," or whatever. One day, I'm cutting one bit, and Jason comes up to me after the end of the scene, and he'd added something that wasn't in the script. He'd ad-libbed something at the very end of the scene. And I guess I should have considered the fact that it was just for the audience and for him and left it in, but I'm also thinking it's another 20 seconds that I know I'm going to cut out of the show. But he actually got on me a little bit about that. That was the only time anybody ever said anything. And then after that, of course, if he did anything a little extra at the end of the scene, I was absolutely sure to keep it in.
Wow. Yeah. I mean,
so then you asked me about how it ended up working. How it ended up working was Jerry would send the writer or writing team down after I'd built the show to sort of try to get the time out. And sometimes that meant just looking for time, and sometimes that meant also reworking scenes. It was just, that's how it worked out.
What was it? Was it the writer of the show, or we've heard, without? Okay, so it's typically the writer of the show, because without Larry there and Jerry doing so much, we've heard there was different camps kind of taking part of that producer or showrunner-ish role from Jerry, like right. Like Alec Berg or maybe Melman's, that sort of thing. But it sounds like
Jeff and Alec would come down. Dave would come down. Mandel, yeah. Andy Robbins and his partner,
Cavett.
Cavett. Jen, I think Crittenden was there. So they'd come down, and some of them would be very want to be very involved in it or have very specific ideas, and some of them were literally just kind of looking at the show, kind of going, what do you think about going from here to there, taking this out and just taking out the time? It was that kind of situation.
Right. Aside from the finale, which we want to get to, we have heard stories, although Larry wasn't technically show running anymore, season 8 and 9, that he was on set. He would pop in or kind of be around. Did you have any interactions with Larry, prior to the finale? Or actually, if not, then, maybe we can get into the finale, because, now Larry comes back for the finale. You're nominated that was one of the ones nominated for an Emmy, right? The finale for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you got Larry of all of this footage. You have, shots of galore, all the guest stars. I mean, that take us I know we're kind of jumping here, but maybe we just jump into the finale here with Larry and just what that endeavor was like.
Let me set the situation. Directly preceding the finale had been the Puerto Rican day. That was a 5-day shoot where I had 225,000 feet of film to deal with. Okay. I've known a friend of mine who directed a major motion picture and shot 150. Okay. So I had all this footage. The finale's going on where they've put a motion detector in my room, a new lock on my door. People couldn't keep pages. You've heard all the stories.
Probably not as crazy as yours, because you had the footage. You had the actual footage.
Well, right? I had to give it back every day. But on top of that, we were wrapping up the series. There was a 9-year retrospective gag reel that had to be built. So the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks of that whole experience was intense. And I didn't go home some nights. I mean, I literally would use a shower and a dressing room and go up and get one of the T-shirts they're throwing to the audience, because I had my assistant and somebody else in another room building packages for the gag reel. I still had the Puerto Rican day I'm wrestling with, and we're shooting the finale. So it was a beast. The whole thing was just a beast. I mean, first of all, I was there at the studio for 2 years, 6 days a week, and sometimes 7. because Jerry wouldn't edit. He didn't like to edit on Thursday, and if he was busy Friday, then some days he was only available Saturday, Sunday. So I would literally drive in just to show him a cut and whatever. It was just a mammoth amount of work, but that's what everybody was doing. I mean, he worked harder than anybody. The finale was really, really interesting, besides all the security and everybody trying to guess the storyline. But it was fun for me to finally meet the famous one and only Larry David. And they sat in the back of the room going over the show and talking about it. Now, my first build of the entire script with all the flashbacks and everything in it was 88 minutes. Now, it's an hour of television supposed to be 45.
Yeah, what did net out at, like 70 something?
No, we got it down to like 47 or 48 minutes. And then after the rep party, where I showed them a 27-minute retrospective gag reel, the people at NBC said, "Oh, well, we've got to air that too." So they tacked the gag reel, or what they might have called the clip reel, on the back of our 47-minute show and maybe added another 5 or 10 minutes to it. But there was so much pressure coming that I put on myself for that because, I was only there for 2 seasons. I mean, that's why they had this writer's assistant, Darren, I forgot his last name, working with my assistant, Dave, and Tim as well, knowing what, were the funny bits, the out bits. And so I think I worked on that 3 days straight, maybe 4 days straight. That's when I never went home. Because there were 600 people coming to the party. And on top of all that, is the finale. And there are shots that were on some of the finale tapes that were locked up. So I went to the mix to hear the sound mix, and I see timecode burn in on shots that should be pristine. And I'm like, oh, heck no. So I had to go back to the post house before the rap party, dig through the tapes, and realized that they'd stopped recording, went past, and tacked some stuff on the short ends of the ends of the tape, and they'd missed it and when they online the gag reel. So I found those shots and then called the associate producer and said, "I've got to go home and get ready for the party. You got to come here and fix these shots." So,
wow.
But the finale was just, it was crazy. I mean, was
it fun for you, or were you just like anxiety, stress, Larry David there? Like, tell us a little bit, like.
Well, Larry and Jerry in the back they were fun. When I'm sitting down at the edit bay with them, I wasn't really thinking about the gag reel or thinking about the Puerto Rican Day. I was literally thinking, this is the penultimate episode of this incredible show. And so my focus was really to service them and to just keep focusing on the show. What are we losing? Which flashback are we going to lose? How are we going to get from here to there? Like, how do we compress this and basically almost cut it in half?
Right.
And
so Skip, what? Yeah. I mean, it was very polarizing, right? The finale.
Yes.
We enjoyed it. We enjoyed it for sure. What got cut? Was there anything memorable that you remember that didn't make the cut?
Oh, they were like, if I had my script, which
you're looking,
I could go through it, but it was just certain flashbacks. There were just certain flashbacks to different funny moments when they were, behaving badly or whatever.
There's so many of them.
It's been 26 years. It's hard for me 24 years to really remember, because at the time it was all there was so much going on, and all I wanted to do was just the best possible job I could do and build the show they wanted to build.
And Skip, are you on set watching live and kind of making mental notes, or do you wait until you get kind of everything in that back room, if you will?
Well, a lot of times I don't have the time to be outside when they're shooting stuff. So a lot of times the Monday, Tuesday stuff that they did on their swing sets and outside stuff, I might have visited, but I couldn't stay very long. So all of that stuff I'm kind of cutting from scratch. As I said before, when I'm on the stage, I've got the script in my hand, and I'm literally writing on the script, pieces that I think are just gold. Or they would let the audience go at about 11, and some nights we'd shoot another hour and a half. So then it was like trying to remember or write down what the alt jokes were and what I might like or think about those and what the different lines were, and make notes to myself so I just remember when I sat back down the next day to edit. But sometimes you're just, like with the Puerto Rican day, it was 5 days in the back lot of Universal or somewhere. I was never there. So that's literally hours of sitting there watching my quad split run at speed and looking at take after take of this or that and trying to find the pieces that I'm looking for and then how to bridge from here to there. And, it's a very, if you've never really sat in an edit bay, which most people can't tolerate because it's tedious work, and you just hear the same, I've been working at home now for like 3 years since the pandemic, and my girlfriend would be like, man, I just heard you go over that line like 8 times. What were you looking at? I said, okay, first time I'm actually looking for the words. The second time I'm looking for the other person's reaction. The third time I'm making sure there's no physical mismatch on the set. The next time I'm trying to see if I have a word that I love this take, but one word's garbled. So I'm going to try to go back to take 6. I'm on take 9 and see if I can steal that word from that person and put it in their mouth to make this take work. I mean, it's incredibly detailed work.
Yeah, I'd like to actually stay here for a second because it's fascinating to me. I mean, editing in general, whether it's just writing and then someone edits, or you're editing yourself editing, right? Or you're talking about your TV, or you go to movies, even music, they do 15 cuts, 15 takes, and then they release, they make 12 songs and only 10 make the album, right? The whole editing process, especially for someone that overthinks things, it's like, oh, did I leave this one out? Should I kept that in? That was a killer. You look at someone like, Bob Dylan or Neil Young, who has all this unreleased stuff. That's incredible, right? So to your point there, I mean, like how often did you like cut something and almost think to yourself like, that I wanted to keep in, or, if that only stayed in, or there's just so many levels to it. You just mentioned it's so tedious. It's so demanding. You're just in the room, just back and forth, every little thing. It's commendable, and it's a certain skill that, it takes a lot of patience. I'm just, curious, in your mind, like where were you like struggling with an edit or, something like that? I don't know, just kind of keep going at that point.
I guess the good news is the process is my editor's cut is the full script. So I'm not taking out anything. That's producer work. My job is to show them everything, and then they decide what is or isn't working. So most of the time, I'll pitch sometimes. Of course, I'll pitch. But most of the time, I leave that to them, unless they're struggling for something, and I think there's something that we can do and jump. And, it's kind of a give and take situation. And we get down there, and then sometimes, they'll get within 10 seconds and go, I'll just say I can get the rest of it out by just tucking frames.
It's funny. And you sound like a Seinfeld fan, and it's funny. We all remember the marine biologist, that final scene. And, the story is that they did that in one cut. Like, that was it.
Yep, that happens.
Jason Alexander's speech, so rare.
Yeah.
So take us a little into season 8 and 9. I mean, Peter Melman, friend of the show, the yada yada, for instance. I know NBC gave you guys extra time to do that episode. Is just because you're so in tune in like 22 minutes, right? That's what every show has to be. And then when they give you extra time, was that kind of a blessing for you, or did that kind of throw off what you normally are used to? Tell me a little bit about like an episode like the Yada Yada where, NBC was looking for that extra time and obviously to, I guess get more commercial airtime.
Anytime I can make a show longer is good for me.
Yeah.
Because I can leave stuff. So, we don't have to, cut the babies we love so much. So whenever they're giving me time, I'm loving it. If we have to take time out, that's not a good thing. But the Yada Yada was just a tremendous episode. I mean, I can't tell you how many hours I spent laughing my ass off in my room. I mean, just watching these people do this stuff was what a joy. I mean, that one, I remember cutting the montage of the dinner scene of the Manhands episode when they're cracking the lobster. And I mean, I lost it every single time I went through that scene. I mean, I couldn't help it. It was just the most hysterical thing. But the Yada Yada was so just beautiful because it became urban lexicon.
Right.
I mean, it was great. And I don't remember whether they gave us more time or took time away. I honestly don't remember, other than the fact that, it was a beautiful episode, a great episode. I mean, they were all fantastic.
Yeah, you had mentioned earlier, you told Jerry the Cadillac was your favorite. Was that as just a fan of comedy, or was there something editing wise too that you're like, that particular one kind of stuck out to you, or was it just that's your favorite episode for? Well,
it was a couple of things. I mean, it was hysterical. The whole going to dinner at 4:30 with his parents. That he's given his dad a car, and his dad's like not that interested. That and that the way they tied up the rye when Morty's going for the homeowners association, he's just about to lock it in, and this one lady who's got to give her approval comes in and goes, "You stole my rye," and just everything just completely implodes. And I just thought the whole thing with the car, I think they even had part of the pen, astronaut pen guy in with that.
Yeah, Klompus is in there.
Yeah, it was just like there was so much great stuff in that whole thing, and the way that it tied up the other story, I just thought was so brilliant.
So another really interesting episode in season 9 was the betrayal, which is the opposite episode, if you will, or what? Yeah, opposite. So. Yeah. I mean, that must have been even when I rewatched it, I'm like, well, how did they do that? Really interesting. Like, tell us a little bit about that. And if it was like, I don't know, I keep asking if it was stressful, but it seemed like that could have been a stressful episode.
No, I mean, once I got there and got used to the schedule and how everybody worked, it wasn't the only time I got stressed. Really, was the very first time I ran for Jerry. And B, at the very end, when we had these two huge elements and the gag reel to all try to work on at the same time. Other than that, it was pretty, we all got into a rhythm, and it wasn't a stressful job. It was a beautiful job, and nobody really ever pushed me to get anything done any faster than I was going to do it, because I have a process, and if I need a little extra time to make something right, I do. But to your question, the episode,
things happening in reverse with the Indian wedding, and
I kind of feel like, to some degree, and this is a bit of a sidebar, that had I actually, they came to me while all the finale and the Puerto Rican Day, all this stuff was going on. They said, "Well, what episode are you going to put up for the Emmy this year?" And I figured the finale, but then again, I wasn't sure how the audience was going to take it. And when I didn't win, I thought, had I just used the backwards episode, because of how controversial the finale was, they didn't look at the amount of work that went into it. They just looked at whether it was a funny episode. And I think if I would have actually put up the backwards episode, I would have won the Emmy that year. But sidebar, cutting it together wasn't all that difficult. They had it mapped out clearly in the script. It was a riff on a Bertolt Brecht play, I guess, that runs backwards. And it was super clever, and it worked out great. I loved it. George's big boots, it was just hysterical. And I think that would have probably serviced me better. But at the time I thought, they've got to see how much work's going into the finale, but it's people watching the show and deciding whether it's funny or not.
Yeah. And to your point, I think that's interesting, because we talk about that a lot, that what's popular doesn't necessarily mean like you said, the best work was done and things like that. The other one that was put up, I think, for an Emmy was the Pothole, right? Is that right?
My first one was, I believe, The Abstinence.
Oh, The Abstinence. You're right. The Abstinence.
That's what I got my ACETI for.
Yes. I wrote the Pothole down as a note because of we've heard stories of it being one of the more intricate shots, and there was like the upside down under the toilet and overhead shots and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And
the
it cost the most money. Yeah, the toothbrush.
Great work.
Yeah, we heard all.
And also on the Frogger, when they get up over the street and they're watching George cut through the cars. I mean, it just, TV will never. Well, I guess I shouldn't say that now, but because now some of the streaming budgets are ridiculous. But there was nothing that we couldn't do. I mean, NBC gave Jerry carte blanche to write and shoot and whatever. It was never money. After that, it was a different story. The models started changing. But I mean, we could do anything. He could do anything. And, turning Kramer into a Kenny Roaster chicken.
Yeah, I guess so. Skip, what were some of your? You were part of so many memorable episodes. What the Kenny Rogers, obviously one of them. What are some of the other ones that you were most fond of, either just from being a part of or actually editing?
I mean, they were all great, but I mean, again, I love the Man Hands, love The Abstinence, love the Yada Yada. Good Ugly Bad, Good Naked Bad Naked, another hysterical episode. I think Kenny Roasters, The Slicer, another. I mean, I was just the Muffin Top. They were just, they were all just great.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's so many different. We talk about this a lot in seasons 8 and 9. Things got just more outlandish, bigger, grander, more cartoonish, and with that came so many shots. Just quick shot of this, that must have been a whole new level of editing too. As far as like most sitcoms are like they're sitting in their 2 sets, whereas Seinfeld there is 15, 16 different vignettes and things like that. I'm assuming that was a challenge, or at least something different for a television editor.
Oh, it was I mean, I get a scene that was basically stage direction, and it's. Kramer running down the street, George chasing him or something. But I have a clapper here. I don't know. People probably have talked about the gifts and things that they were so generous to give away at the end of the show. One of the shows was an old clapper, that had the last shot of the last scene of the last show on. And, normally your scenes are A through R, or something like that. And this thing's like scene double D, triple D. I mean, there were just so many tiny little bits of this and that. And it made it fun, because it was a challenge. I mean, I like the challenge. I love the challenge of taking all of this footage and turning it into, I was just always conscious of the fact that I was working on something important, something big, something meaningful. And so I just took it very seriously and would plow through everything and really try to tell the story and try to, exaggerate this or push this up a little if that I could, and it didn't always work. Sometimes my perspective on something was a little different than someone else's, but they gave me a lot of leeway to do whatever I kind of felt like, because once they knew that I, obviously knew the show and knew what they were looking for. And once I got their pacing and everything else down, it was like, they gave me a fair amount of leeway to do whatever I wanted to do up until the point that they came in to just finish everything up.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like that based on the way you painted that picture on that first meeting when you're in that room and you got it 27 minutes and Ackerman and Jerry came in and were like, great. So, and I'm just going to go back, 2 years prior again, you got that phone call. You said it was late July, early July. So were you under contract at Grace Under Fire? And then, the Seinfeld thing happened. You're like, sorry, I got to take this. Or how does that work, in the editing world?
Well, I was worried because, we're talking about Carsey Werner as a production company. I mean, this is Cosby, this is Sybil, this is Roseanne. This is this is a huge show. And I mean, I had never burned a bridge. In other words, I'd never told someone I was coming back and then didn't show up. I mean, never. And the line producer was somebody that I'd worked with before and whatnot. And I ended up having to call somebody higher up in the food chain to just sort of say, look, it pains me to do this, but I have to do this. And, some of them took it better than others. But at the end of the day, there was really no question. But it was a difficult situation. It was a difficult phone call for me to make. It was a real difficult phone call because in our business, it's all relationship based, and I don't want to be the guy that always just sort of takes a powder. I never had been, but when you get a once in a lifetime opportunity, you have to go.
Yeah, and speaking of, you mentioned relationships, and I don't know if there's a connection here, but your next stop after Seinfeld was it NewsRadio with Tom Sharonis, who obviously was the legendary director on Seinfeld on seasons 1 through 5.
Right.
Was that how'd that role come about? Was there a Seinfeld connection or introduction there?
I knew one of the producers on the show, and they were looking for somebody different. And they actually just reached out to me. I don't think it was Tom. I think it was the line producer who brought me in to meet with Paul Sims and all those guys. And that was a very bittersweet situation because Phil Hartman's accident happened on my birthday. And it was the end of May, and I'm supposed to start the show in July. And one of the leads is gone. And I got a call from my producer who goes, just hang tight and we'll see what we're not, whatever. And then they came up with Lovitz, and we ended up doing the show. But that was a really fun show to work on. I actually directed 2 episodes of that show.
Yeah.
And that was my second show with Andy Dick.
Yeah, I mean, he's a character, and Phil Hartman. Yeah, that was devastating. I
was literally
of all time
in shock.
Yeah. While we're kind of on this subject, there was one question I wanted to ask you. So you leave Seinfeld, and you've obviously the admiration you had for Jerry and the rest of the crew is evident in how you're talking to us about working there and working with them, and then you go on to NewsRadio, which is another. It's a big hit. I mean, for those not around at the time, it was a big show, and it was a very good show, well written, great cast. But you did many shows after it, so I'm just curious. What did you take with you from the Seinfeld set? What was different as you go to these other sets like that wasn't on Seinfeld, or maybe that you mimicked, that you saw the differences, or how Jerry worked, or what you learned from working with Jerry and all his guys there, Mandel and Berg and the whole crew. But how is it different when you go to these other sets? I mean, you don't have to spill details of bad stuff. I just mean generally speaking,
no.
What are you picking up on? How's it different? What are you learning from Jerry?
All of my knowledge base for the most part was learning from the different people I worked with. And I learned the producers and the directors, the people that sort of taught me comedy. And so you naturally take away things from Seinfeld, but nothing was like Seinfeld. I mean, for the first 5 years that I would go for an interview for a new show, 9 times out of 10, the exec producers didn't want to talk about their show. They wanted to know, what was it like? What was it like working on that show? And, what are you going to say? It was crazy and beautiful. But, I always kept honing my craft and trying to learn something from everybody. And part of the thing I took away there was a lot of times how I could take out a lot of time and do it in a way that it didn't look choppy or awkward. I mean, if I had to boil it down, because look, performance is always performance, timing's timing. But Seinfeld was always between 6 and 9 minutes long on every episode. And so there the trick was for me, my training there, one of the things was, again, I don't like to get caught, with my editing. If I can somehow figure some workaround where it looks like it's somehow smooth or somehow I can trick your eye into seeing something else, that was probably one of the stronger lessons I would say that I took from that, because, obviously I, know where the punchline is and who to be on when they're talking and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And the son, we spoke with Jonathan Wolf. I'm curious how closely you worked with him, because music does play a part, right? At these end scenes that you're referring to, where you can kind of cut some time, but then, like whatever that little beat is, and that could add time, right? Like,
sure.
I always wondered how closely you kind of worked with Jonathan Wolf and kind of the music department, if you will.
Well, I'm always conscious of trying to let them have time to ring out their music, and sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. I mean, when I've got a producer saying we need to cut this scene right here, and the camera's moving like 10 frames or 5 frames after their line, it's like I've only got what I've got. And sometimes they don't normally want to ring out stuff in black, but I'm always conscious of trying to give the composer some time to get their cues, but ultimately they'll get my block cut and they'll have to match to it. So if it's just that's what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll temp in stuff because I would always temp in, cues. I would temp in backgrounds and temp in sound effects. I wanted my cut to be really fleshed out like you were watching it. Now, of course, they're going to replace my loops of background outside noise or whatever clanging and pots and pans Kramer's doing or whatever, right, augmenting what he's got. But I'm always going to give them some idea of how it should all sound together, and then they'll go back to the mix and redo a lot of that.
Yeah, and you just mentioned Kramer, but you touched on Jason, kind of the one time anyone ever said anything was about the Jason comment, but we didn't really get to Julia or Michael. I mean, obviously we talked to about Jerry a lot. What was your interaction like with Julia and Michael, and sort of from a professional standpoint, from a personal standpoint? I mean, how often are you kind of with them, on a personal and professional level, editing their takes? I'm sure Michael Richards had a million things to choose from and things like that, his facial expressions. Just wanted your thoughts on the two other stars.
Actors don't generally come to the edit bay. It's kind of a hard fast rule, and really never let them up there. Julia is a delight. She's a lovely, lovely person. Everybody was. Jason was really, really sweet too. We just had the one little thing where he got a little bent out of shape, but that didn't last very long. Michael was the more standoffish. He was always kind of off to the side, working on his bits. He was very cerebral and he did a lot of work. I'll tell you, the only time that we ever had any kind of conversation or where we actually even locked eyes and had a couple words spoken was I brought my 2 daughters to the set one day when they were little girls, and Michael just lit up when he saw them and came over to talk to them and could not have been sweeter to my girls. And, I was just kind of blown away because I always felt he was a little more aloof, a little whatever. My kids he could not have been sweeter and nicer to them. And so same with Jerry and everybody. I mean, I was there on show night. They'd see my work, they'd see how they looked. They'd see that I protected them as much as I possibly can, tried to make them as even funnier than they already were. So it was, I think it was kind of, I felt respected, and I gave it back to them. It was a very respectful set. We were all professionals working really hard to hold up this standard that everyone expects. And so it was fun, but it was also serious. I took that very seriously.
Well, listen, it's easy to see why Jerry hired you in 15 minutes. I mean, just your respect for the show, your respect for the job, it's incredible. And for my money, the name's Skip Collector, best name in Hollywood. So we
thank you.
We can't thank you enough for telling these stories. And I mean, obviously, your work speaks for itself. Bravo. Thank
you so much. It was, again, thank you for bringing me on the show. That was undoubtedly the highlight of my career. That a guy from Virginia comes to LA to work on a show. I don't know anybody. I don't have any relatives out here. And I just kind of work and then get an opportunity like this. I am fulfilled. I am pretty much semi-retired at this point. I did it. I was there. And it feels good. I did a real good job for those people. I worked my ass off for them because they deserve to have somebody work like that. And it was a privilege and an honor. And I always had such great things to work with. It's like an editor can't really produce anything of value or anything funny unless they've been given all these gifts of footage. And Andy always just had every angle covered, and I never was looking for a shot. It's like I knew it was there. I just had to kind of find which take, but it was an embarrassment of riches. It was just great.
And $100 extra a week didn't hurt either. There you go.
I tell that story to people today, and they just, it floored me. It floored me. I told my dad that story. He just fell off his chair.
Fantastic. Skip, thanks so much.
Thank you, Skip. This was great.
My pleasure. You guys take care.
So much.
Take it easy.
Bye.